So here's another thing I'm curious about. The idea of being part of a collective suggests that the group is taking on a singular name. And so the group is coalescing behind the name. And also some people would argue hiding behind the name rather than promoting the individuals and ascribing particular names of individuals. Tell me how what that, what power does a collective wield that a band of, a group of individuals does not? And maybe what challenges you faced presenting your work or your books as a collective. I know some collectives can't get published because they are not willing to reveal the individual names of their members. Tell me what it's like to function as a collective as a whole rather than as a group
Yeah.
of individuals together.
Well, one sad thing is we'll never get a MacArthur grant because it's defined as genius, and a genius is an individual. I think one of the faults of modern art education is that people are educated to want to be geniuses and to be individualists. And when you think of all of the, of all the contemporary art forms like theater, dance, film, video, they all depend on teamwork. And if you look back into the history of art, ateliers, that was teamwork too. So this idea of the artist as a lonely genius, struggling in his garret, is kind of a modernist stereotype. And we discovered early on that it was, we had a lot of power as a collective. Um, and then we decided to have a group name. And now that is difficult in some ways because it's kind of sad. You work your whole life, and I have friends I can't talk to about my work. Although it's kind of nice to have two personas that you can slide in between. Um, we've never really had any trouble signing, contracts. You just find a lawyer who will sign it for you. We're incorporated. We have a corporation. We have a legal entity.
Mhm.
So, there is, and if corporations are people, well, that's the perverse side of that reasoning. Um, you know, so it has wonderful, wonderful advantages, and it has some drawbacks as well. And again, it's swimming against, against the top, the stream. It's swimming against the current because the art market wants geniuses, and many of the tropes of, of art history are about identifying geniuses.
Got it. No, I just think it's a powerful way to resist those tropes, and a way it's symbolic and actual in its approach of saying, look, there's power when we come together. We can make difference when we come together and work as a collective rather than working as individuals who maybe have shared common interest, but maybe that disperses some of the some of the work that we can do.
It's super messy because if you're trained to investigate yourself and to have all the freedom, to be yourself, sometimes you have to give up a little bit of that to agree to work in a collective because the product of the collective might not be what you would do alone. So that's hard, and we had members who dropped out because they couldn't deal with that. They really wanted to express themselves rather than to submit their ideas to a collective process. Um, and people get angry. People, not everyone left the group happy. Some people didn't even last a meeting. So but that's human nature, and that's that happens in all human interactions. There are conflicts, and you have to figure it out. And not everybody can work with everybody else. We certainly learned that you have to have a certain mix of and you also have to agree on how to make decisions. And we had a very simple idea that we would try to work on consensus. If we did something that really offended one person, well, we wouldn't do it. Now, I don't know whether, women are particularly, good at that, at making compromise. I don't know, but we figured it out. But it is messy and it's anxiety provoking, and but in the end, you have a great, power and broad reach with that kind of work. And I think it's absolutely contemporary. It really fits the 20th century art form. It's
I would agree. I mean, just because it's messy and challenging and difficult doesn't mean it's not important and worthwhile. And certainly, you've given, intentionally or not, I think the Guerrilla Girls have probably afforded other collectives space to see themselves as being successful in that way, as being able to take on the challenges, the messiness of working together as a collective. So on behalf of other people who appreciate your work, thank you for affording that to other collectives and other groups who dared to try.
Well, this is the golden age of art activism. There's just so many, and maybe because of the pandemic and the lockdown and museums closing for so long, a lot of people involved in museums have started to critically think about them. And there are organizations like Change the Museum, Cancel Art Galleries. There's the Illuminator. There's Decolonize This Place. There's Not Surprised 2018. There are so many interesting and active groups coming up right now. And I'm really very excited because when we were doing it, we were like the only ones. And everybody thought we were crazy. I'm sure that some relationships broke up because of the Guerrilla Girls. But and when we started, there weren't words like concepts like institutional critique or social practice or culture jamming. There weren't words to describe what we were doing. And actually, that's why people would say, "Oh, the Guerrilla Girls are just a bunch of complaining whiners," rather than say, "Oh, they're practicing, institutional critique, and it's a social practice, and they're being intersectional."
Right. Well, we need to have folks provoking in order for others to find that space. Socially engaged art, public pedagogy. I use those terms quite often. And think that the work of the Guerrilla Girls fits into those registers as well. And I would think there's an educational component, maybe not intentional again. Can you speak a little bit maybe about how you see your work with the Guerrilla Girls as educational or even pedagogical or instructional or even functioning as curriculum, right? If curriculum might be thought of as educational experience, how might the work of the Guerrilla Girls be considered curriculum?
Well, actually, someone at the University of Arizona wrote a wonderful elementary school curriculum around our work. We could never have done it, but when we saw it, it was like, oh, wow, this is great. Well, we've never wanted to preach to the choir. We've always wanted to be transformative. We've always wanted to change people's minds. And isn't that really the intent of education?
Yes.
And,
Well, if not, well, I would say if not change people's minds, provide a space in which minds can be changed. How's that?
Yeah. And I think that was why we developed this provocative headline and then killer statistics. You say, you make an outrageous headline like, "Do women get naked? You have to be naked to get into the museum," and that gets someone who might not agree with you. It gets their attention, but you have a moment in their mind, and then you back it up with that information. What was it? 85% of the no, only 5% of the artists in the modern art section are women, but 85% of the nudes are female. Well, there it is. Boom. We've done things about abortion, the history of abortion. saying, guerrilla girls demand return to traditional values on abortion. And you say, what? The guerrilla girls? That sounds like they're pro-life. And then you read the small print, because we found this stunning fact that until like 1867, the Catholic Church did not oppose abortion in the first few months of pregnancy.
Wow.
So that was kind of shocking, and it put into question what are traditional values. So I think that there's a lot of education that goes on in our work, and we like to use information. We call it the subversive use of information. We use information to subvert and to really cut through all kinds of preconceived notions. We use information in a very biting way. We really use it as a cudgel.
And you do it effectively.
It all came from Penn State. It
there
all
you go.
came from Penn State.
Of course.
I would like to mention a couple of my professors there.
Sure, please.
As I said, I didn't have any female professors at all in the art history department. But Eugenio Battisti was an art historian, a very wild and crazy Italian art historian, and he would spend a semester a year at Penn State, and he was like a breath of fresh air. He made the craziest, connections between things, and he always had unusual takes on things. He would come in and just stir everything up, and then when he was gone, I think all the other professors were really happy, but it just lasted with me. And he didn't demand fealty or a kind of I certainly respected him, but he was not on a pedestal. He was very approachable, and he listened to everything you said, and he was just a breath of fresh air. George Monner was my thesis advisor, and he very kindly sort of set me up with Wayne Anderson, to have an interview, and that's how I got the job at MIT. So he was very crucial to my future. And there were two really important classmates of mine who I've kept up with ever since, and they're Whitney Chadwick, who went on to write very important books about women in surrealism, and also she was the author of the major art history book about women, art, and society. And also Frances Turpak, who is a curator at the Getty, who is still a very close and wonderful friend. And she has done incredible shows at the Getty that have, talked about the history of photography in new ways. And she's working with the ruins in Palmyra, Chinese photography. She sort of takes on these big topics and looks at them in a new and wonderful way. And I'm really happy to have known them. And I think that, our friendship and our experiences at Penn State were really important to what we have done since. I mean, we were also combating the establishment at Penn State, but it also gave us the room to do that.
Thank you so much for bringing their names into this conversation. It's refreshing to hear, how professors can inspire, or at least construct a space for students to be successful, where classmates support each other in the moment, and then maintain contact for years to come, and to learn about their successes, I should say. It's good to know that Penn State at least was in the right place at the right time for all of those people to be together, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I always tell graduate students, that you're supposed to be unhappy when you're in graduate school, and you're supposed to be unhappy. That's
you're doing it right.
You're doing it right, and to look around and realize that your classmates are going to be with you professionally for a long, long time.
Yeah, I talk fondly about my graduate school classmates, because I earned 2 degrees like you from Penn
Mhm.
State, my master and my PhD, both in art education. And I talk fondly of my graduate school siblings, or my sisters from grad school.
Yeah.
And so, no, I completely agree with you. Look, I want to talk a bit now about your most recent book, right? Wasn't it? It was just
Yes,
released,
yes,
right?
here it is, right here. It's
Okay,
the art of, here, if I put it in front of myself, how's that?
that's
The
better.
Little Girls, the Art of Behaving Badly,
The Art of Behaving Badly. I tell you what, if
with
you
a
told me
zombie face.
that, if you told me that that was the title, if I didn't know who the authors were, I would say has to be the Guerrilla Girls, The Art of Behaving Badly. What do we need to know about this book, Frida?
Well, it's a picture book. It doesn't have a lot of art jargon. It has no essays by experts or
Mhm.
art historians. It's all us. And it tells you just about everything that we've done from 1985 to the present. And of course, it's now obsolete because we've done a couple projects since then.
Hmm.
But it's a real compendium of what we've done, and it also shows how we have evolved, and also how the art world has evolved, because we're always dealing with the situation, and the situation is always changing, so the work
Mhm.
changes as well. You'll see where we went from doing black and white posters that were all, in some cases, letrasetted. We didn't even have the money to type, set type. The early
Wow.
ones, if you look closely, you'll see that they were letrasetted. To the advent of computers, when all of a sudden we could do color and things were cheap. And then also when we went online, we had one of the very early websites in the mid 90s.
Mhm.
Um, and all of a sudden that allowed us to communicate with people all over the world. And we started getting email from people all over the world from ages 8 to 85, sort of telling them that our work wasn't just about the art world, it was about their lives too. And that's super, super gratifying, although it's a lot of work answering all those letters. And we try to answer everyone we get. Um, and then recently, we've been dealing with the structure of museums in the art world. So we've written several codes of ethics for art museums. The first one we did was in the 90s, and the most recent one that we did was 2 years ago. And it has things like, if thou showest art by rich artists purchased for lots of money at the most expensive art galleries by very rich collectors, thou must call yourself the Museum of Rich People's Art.
Ah, thou must.
Or, yes, if we wrote it all in biblical language because we want people to think of them as the Ten Commandments. Um, if thou, um, if, if, if thou do not show art as diverse as the culture you say you represent, thou art not showing the history of art, thou art only showing the history of wealth and power.
Wow.
So,
Just calling people out.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm happy to send any images of any of these, because we've been talking a lot now. And I think, if some of the images were up, the point would be, even better made.
Mhm. Well, that sounds good. We've talked actually about might we make some modifications to this format and
Sure.
including some images. And I have to say, just by adding the backdrop that you have, the poster that you have taken us to a new level with visuals just by doing that. So another
It's all in
innovation.
the it's all in the preferences of Zoom. You can do it too. You can put yourself anywhere.
That's it. So look, we're about 6 weeks away from January of 2021. Some people say the year 2020 has given us just about everything humans can handle. What's exciting in 2021? What are the Guerrilla Girls looking forward to next year?
Relaxing a little bit and having the anxiety level a little bit lower. Well, we are working on the male grays, which is going to come out in June in London. It's part of Art Night London, which is an all-night arts festival on the longest day of the year, kind of a Midsummer Night's Nightmare. um, and we're not sure what form that will take. Originally, it was going to be a large outdoor installation. I think now it's probably going to be online, which could be super interesting. We're going to tell the stories of bad male behavior in the history of art and how it informs the art itself. Um, and um, and we're trying to make sure this book gets out. And we'd love for it to have as broad a kind of exposure as possible. And we continue to just keep our eyes and ears open. We have a very active Instagram account, which we occasionally give over. You know, we have Grill Girls Takeover, where we'll give the site to some activist groups that we really admire and let them see what they'll do with it.
Nice.
And I think we're also just waiting for a little bit of relief to see what happens in the new administration. I mean, we've been through, I mean, we started out when Ronald Reagan was president. That's
Oh,
how
that's
long
right.
we've been
Yes.
around. And we've, you know, bad news sometimes is good news for us because it gives us something to chew on. You know, during the more progressive administrations, you know, sometimes we have to really look hard. But I think what we're going to really do is look into the structure of museums, because this idea of trustees and billionaire oligarchs
Mhm.
art washing their reputations by giving money to museums and then behaving very badly in their business lives is something that people should really think about. I mean, if museums have an educational mission,
Mhm.
shouldn't they make the world a better place? And when you have trustees on your boards and giving you money who sell addictive opioids, who sell weapons of state control, who invest in for-profit prisons, who securitize student loans, you know, really get students more and more in debt, that doesn't make any sense. Shouldn't trustees of museums be people who make the world a better place through their investments? Shouldn't that be how they make their money? So we think that museums really need to rethink that. Also, museums are oftentimes run in really old-fashioned kind of white male hierarchies, and there are stories of harassment and racism and sexism in museums that would never happen even in the corporate world. So we're really encouraging artists and museum employees to come forward and talk about their experiences, because museums need to change. I mean, what just happened at the Baltimore Museum is kind of sad. They had a whole program to change the museum. They really saw their weaknesses. They wanted to change it, and they were deaccessing a few um, very valuable works of art so that they could finance these changes and also purchase art by women and artists of color. And at the last minute, the powers that be stepped in and kept the sale from happening. So that's a huge disappointment. Museums should be modernized and become more contemporary as well.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I agree. And as you're, we've talked about museums a few times throughout our conversation, and I'm not sure if you're keeping up with what's happening here on campus with the Palmer Museum of Art.
No, tell me.
Okay, are you ready for this?
Yeah.
We have the green light to build a new museum on the edge of campus across Park Avenue at the Arboretum. So we'll be moving the physical structure of the museum from the center of campus to another site. And the timeline is essentially about 3 years away. And so we're very much looking forward to the construction of this new space that will allow us to double the amount of work that we can exhibit at any one time. And it's allowing us to think through the kinds of art, given the new affordances that the architecture will allow larger works, different kinds of engagement with the works. It's happening at a wonderful time for us to be able to think these ideas through. At the same time, we're working on our strategic plan, revising strategic plan, the second goal of our college strategic plan has to do with anti-racism, anti-oppression, and anti-bias. And one of the moves that the Palmer is doing is they are going to commit funding to acquire work of BIPOC artists to expand what is in their collection and expand what is on exhibit. So, over the next three years or so, we certainly have a very focused set of attention on the Palmer Museum of Art. So the work of the Guerrilla Girls and your focus on the museum world, we need to be paying attention to those issues as well. So one thing that we sort of touched on early on was why, how you chose Penn State. I mean, there are a number of other universities, but you said it was in relationship to your father's GI Bill. Is that correct?
Well, I really didn't have the economic wherewithal to go somewhere else. And I did start out at a small liberal arts school in Western Pennsylvania that was very inexpensive, but it was a religious school and it was very conservative. And I think the third week I was there, I realized it was totally the wrong place for me. I had this idea of going, I had gone to a large public high school with 1,000 graduates, and my idea was to go someplace small where I would know my professors. And so the best I could do was this college that will not be named, not so far from Slippery Rock, where I know you went, and my
That's
brother
right.
went to Slippery Rock too.
Oh, is that right?
But this little, religious school not far from Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania, was really not the place for me. So I transferred out and I applied to Penn State. And it was really what I could afford. But once I got there, I realized you could study everything in the world there. Everything. I mean, it had a great meteorology department. Not that I wanted to be a meteorologist. You could study cows and agriculture, and you could study art history. I mean, it was like a smorgasbord of education. The unfortunate part of the undergraduate education when I was there is that it all took place in large lecture halls. I didn't have much one-on-one connection with my professors. But then when I decided to go to graduate school, which is something that I decided my senior year, I took art history and just loved it, and it sort of turned my eyes around. I was an undergraduate literature major, English. It's what sort of study when you don't know what else to study. So my senior year, I had this sort of revelation that I really loved looking at art, and I loved talking about art, and I loved attaching words to art. And I have to acknowledge one of my art history professors, Jan van der Meulen, who really taught me how to write. We used to have to describe a medieval artwork in 3 sentences.
In 3 sentences.
Yes, yes. It was an incredible experience. And then I wrote for the Collegian for a couple of years. And that was fun. It really helped me language-wise, and I think that might be why I, started to get involved in image and language. And Penn State was just a great place for me. It was so democratic. It was all working class kids. Everyone was making their own, making their own way, putting themselves through school. There weren't a lot of, kids flying off for fancy vacations, and everyone had to work, on vacations. And I worked the whole time I was in school. I used to show slides in our history classes.
That was your job?
Yeah. It was my work study job. So,
Nice.
it was just this place where we were all the same.
Mm-hmm.
We were all kind of starting from the same place. Now, thinking back to the diversity of Penn State, I have to say I don't remember so much of it, especially in the art history department. Certainly on the football team, I think Lynn Swan was on the football team then, and in sports. But that I would say was probably the weak point of my of my experience at Penn State. Also during the Vietnam War, there were actually a lot of draft evaders, who would come to State College and sort of live hiding out in the college community. People who refused to go to Vietnam but didn't have conscientious objector status, so they would hide out and then figure a way to get to Canada. That was kind of an interesting time at Penn State. And there was just, the world was there. I mean, it was a self-contained world, because then when you graduated, you had to go somewhere else. You had to start all over somewhere else. Whereas a large university in a big city, that's an easier transition between school and working. It was like getting kicked out of the, getting kicked off the island when you graduated.
So, wow, we've talked about your time in school and your time as an undergraduate. So let's stay in that temporal space now. Some of the viewers of this series obviously will be undergraduates, and I'm curious to know if you had the opportunity to speak to the 18 or 20, the undergraduate Frida Kahlo.
Yeah.
What advice would you have for Frida?
Well, it's really hard right now because education is so expensive. I went through undergraduate without any debt. So that gave me a great freedom on my graduation. And I taught for many years at a university in New York City, and I saw the debt my students were going into to be educated. And I think that makes you a little less adventuresome. And I think that's really unfortunate. So I would say that my experience at sort of taking risks is harder to do now than it was then. Because the situation of graduating with a debt makes you, it's like you have a mortgage on your mind. So I would say, be true to yourself, decide what you want to do, realize that a place like Penn State has every possibility of something to do, and to explore it. I can't imagine something you can't study at Penn State. When I was there, I could take figure skating as phys ed. I remember that. We had an Olympic champion teaching figure skating. It's as a place to be, it just has so many facets that go to every edge of the facet and explore it and see what you would like to do. Your education is really the beginning of the rest of your life, and don't be afraid to fight it. I have spent years fighting my education, and that's not a bad thing. It's the only way things change, and it's the only way great scholarship happens, is asking questions of the scholarship that preceded.
I hear you. Do you think 18-year-old Frida would have listened to that advice?
No. But when I was 18, between 18 and 22, there were so many external things impinging, on my education, and maybe that's the situation now. There was so much stuff going on in the world. My idea of avoiding going out in the world was to continue going to school. I mean, that's sort of one of the reasons why I went to, graduate school in art history. Is that I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew what I was interested in. So I went to graduate school, and I had every intention of getting a PhD until I realized that I had to learn, I learned several languages, but then I had to learn German, and that was it. That was it. I said, I don't think I can do that. At the time, you had to have like 3 languages. You had to read 3 languages to get a PhD in art history. They're all European languages: German, French, and Italian.
Sure.
So that's when I decided I was not built to be a scholar of art history.
I hear you. Well, you've certainly made something of yourself.
Well,
So
that's
look,
my bank account.
Frida, look, while I have a long list of questions, we could keep going. The format that we're working in suggests maybe we need to wrap this up soon, but that doesn't mean we can't have a part 2 or part 3 at some point.
Absolutely.
So just to do that, just to wrap up, what I've done at the end of these interviews is I've asked folks a series of just a few quick questions. I'll deliver a question and you fire a
Sure.
response right back. And these questions have to do with Penn State and your time here. So your favorite place on campus?
The Creamery.
The Creamery. that seems to be a running theme at some point
I
in
remember
these
their
interviews.
mint ice cream. Their mint ice cream was just unbelievable.
Excellent. A defining moment or recollection, a moment or an experience on campus.
Oh, in the fall of 1968, there was a Penn State football game in which General Westmoreland, who was, in charge of, a lot of bad things in Vietnam, was a very good friend of the president of Penn State. And rumor had it that he was coming to go to the football game and he was going to stay with the president. And at that time, the president's house was on campus. So the students had a lookout. And when Westmoreland went into the president's house, they formed a circle around the house and kept him from leaving. And he missed the football game.
Are you serious?
And then the following spring, the president's house was moved off campus. It was such a kind of non-violent way of affecting change.
Wow. Okay. I'm surprised. I was not expecting that to be your answer to that question. Oh my goodness. All right, 2 other quick ones. Where did you live when you were a student?
Oh God, I lived way out in the cow pastures my first year. I'm trying to remember, were they called the Nittany dormitories? They were way out.
Oh, okay.
Not
Nittany Apartments.
No, it was a dorm. It was
Okay.
a dorm. And then I lived in South Halls. And then one year, my last year, I lived in an apartment.
You did not have an apartment.
I lived in an apartment.
Oh, you lived in an apartment. I see. Okay.
With some friends. It was great. It was what an introduction, to adult living. However, we did not get our security deposit back.
Okay. I will not ask a follow-up question about that. All right, last question, and you've sort of addressed this earlier with some of the names that you have shared with us, but an influential person here at Penn State while you were a student?
I couldn't name just one. I would say Eugenia Battisti, George Monner, Whitney Chadwick, Fran Turpak. They were all really important people to me.
It's great to be surrounded by important people and influential people, and it's been great to have some time to chat with you. Frida, this has been a delight, and I want to thank you for joining me. Thanks to the other members of the Guerrilla Girls, and I'm looking forward to seeing you here on campus next fall.
And I'm so proud that Penn State has chosen a dean such as yourself. You are just what we need in education, and I'm just so happy that my alma mater has chosen such a progressive thinker.
Oh, well, thank you. Very kind. Thank you.
And yes, please, let's continue the conversation. And when this pandemic is over, we might even be able to meet, face to mask.
Hopefully, I'm not also wearing a mask when we get to meet. So.
Well, you should be. I hope you're wearing a mask now.
I do. Look, I have one right here. Look. It says, "We are Penn State."
Oh, cool. Yeah. That's your masculinity.
All right. Thank you, Frida.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a
Bye.
great holiday, and let's look forward to 2021.
2021, bring it on. I agree.
Absolutely. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.